Welcome back. I'm Haley here with Kim again, and today we're going to be talking about tenant screening. So, Kim, I think a lot of landlords underestimate how much legal exposure there is here in this process.
Is so true. It is one of the areas where well meaning owners get in trouble most often, not because they're doing anything deliberately wrong, but because they don't know the rules.
So, where do we typically go wrong as landlords?
Usually it boils down to three things: asking tenants the wrong questions, writing listings that signal a preference, or applying screening criteria inconsistently. So the last one, applying rental or screening criteria inconsistently, is the most common one.
Okay. And what do you mean by inconsistently in that context?
So, if you run a credit check on one applicant but not another, that's a problem. Even if your intentions were good, anytime you have a biased or the process has to be fair for everyone. That's what protects you.
Okay. So, yeah, just kind of talking about like protecting and following rules. Maybe let's back up and cover the basics. So, the Fair Housing Act, people have probably heard of, but maybe we should go into what it actually does require.
Right. So, the Fair Housing Act is a federal law and it prohibits discrimination in housing based on seven protected classes, and those are race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability.
Okay. And so that's federal law. Are there additional protections beyond federal law?
There are, yes. Yes, often many states and cities have additional, such as source of income, sexual orientation, age, marital status, and more. So you need to know specifically what applies in your area.
So, lots of layers federal,
Yeah.
city, state.
Yeah.
So, how does a landlord protect themselves from accidentally violating any of this?
Yeah, so it's really important to have a written screening criteria document as the foundation. So, something that you can always refer back to. And before you list a unit, make sure that you've decided what your standards are. So, what is your minimum credit score, income to rent ratio, rental history requirements? And then make sure that you're applying that the same way with every applicant.
Criteria and consistency. So once you have all that written criteria, what does the process actually look like for screening your applicant?
Yeah. So a tenant will fill out an application and you'll get that back. And then you're going to look at doing most likely a credit check and a background check. So we're looking at a credit score, we're looking at criminal history, and then verifying income. So confirming that they work where they say they do, or the income that's coming in monthly qualifies and is accurate, legitimate income.
Okay, so four kind of major components. Maybe let's just break those down and just start with like the application. So what are you looking for in that application?
So we want to see employment history. So have they been at the same job for a period of time, whatever your requirements are? And if they haven't, have they been in the same field? But you don't want to see like big gaps in employment, or maybe they just started a brand new job. Rental history, have they rented before? So that's another thing that in preparing your rental criteria, do you want to allow first time renters? If you do, perhaps you want to ask for a larger deposit or a cosigner. We look at rental references as well. So, contacting the previous landlord, and did they pay rent on time, and did they leave the unit in good condition? So, you also want to make sure too that they sign the application and give you written authorization to run a credit and background check, which is something that you legally need as a signature on that to be able to do that.
Okay. So that's kind of the application, gathering that information. And then what does the credit check usually tell you, or what are you looking for?
Yeah, so a credit check is going to tell you payment history, outstanding debt, judgments, collections. A low credit score doesn't automatically disqualify our company standards, but the context matters. So, was it medical debt? Is it just because they haven't established credit yet? So, you're looking through each one of those layers, and then also patterns of late payments, on prior rent is a meaningful red flag. And so you're seeing that more and more on credit reports now where rent payments are being sent to the credit agency so we can see if people have paid on time or if they've been sent to collections.
Okay. So a lot of stuff that you're looking at. It's not just an application, it's not just a credit check. It's a lot of little pieces that Landmark is screening for all their, all their owners, all their applicants. Is there a rule of thumb that Landmark might follow for income and verifying that?
Yeah. So typically we want to see the gross monthly income at 2.5 to 3 times the monthly rent. So for example, if rent is 1,500, you're looking for 3,750 to 4,500 a month in verifiable income.
Okay.
And that can be hard. I mean, rents are starting to push higher and higher, so we can do that jointly if we have 2 tenants moving in, so their combined income is gonna be 2.5 to 3 times the rent, or if they don't qualify, they're just making sure that they have a qualified cosigner that is able to assist.
Okay. And you mentioned, rental history earlier. How do you verify rental history? What's that process?
Yeah, so you can call prior landlords, and here's a tip, don't just call the last one. Call the previous 2. If you see gaps in the rental history, definitely ask the question. Often, if people have a bad experience with a landlord, they're not going to put them down as a reference.
Sure.
A landlord who wants a difficult tenant gone might also give a glowing reference. So careful, make sure that you're asking legally appropriate questions which are factual. So mostly yes or no questions. And same thing if somebody calls you to get a rental reference, make sure you're only giving yes or no answers. Don't give all the details because you want to make sure that you're also protecting that tenant's privacy. And typically they're signing a release for you to pull their credit to verify income and determine if they've paid rent on time. So, some other questions that we ask is besides did they pay rent on time, did they give proper notice to move out? Would you rent to them again? So,
Mm,
again, yes or no questions.
yeah. Yeah. Good guidelines to follow. I feel like you could spiral, quickly out of the yes or no questions if you're not careful. What is something owners can, legitimately act on and what's off limits when you are going through this process?
So let's start with what you can consider. So,
Okay.
payment history, eviction records, income stability, rental references, and in some small circumstances, criminal history. But again, that varies by jurisdiction. You also don't want to have just a broad rule in your screening criteria if somebody has a felony automatic denial. So with criminal history, you want to just say, like, we're going to take that into consideration. Does it affect other neighbors, other tenants, residents? Have they maybe had something previously and they've taken steps to improve their situation in life and rectify the criminal behavior? So, oftentimes, if somebody's denied for criminal offense, they're allowed to fill out basically a contestment and explain their situation. So you do need to take that into consideration and you do need to offer that if they ask for that.
Okay.
So, yeah, those are
Yeah.
fair game when applying consistently.
What can't you use then?
So anything tied to the protected classes that we spoke on earlier. So for example, you cannot deny somebody if they have children. So you have a property owner that's I've got this very nice condo. I don't want children. I don't want pets. We can't do that.
Yeah.
That's would be familia status. And then with the pets, you got to be careful too. Is it an emotional service animal? So you need to be careful about just flat out denying pets. We like to say no pets, but animals, so assistant animals and emotional support animals with proper documentation are allowed.
Okay. So yeah, that's going back to Fair Housing Act, but also state and local regulations when you mention like protected classes. What about housing vouchers?
Yeah, so where we live in state of Washington, source of income is a protected class. So that means you cannot deny a tenant simply because they receive housing assistance. So if anybody calls, and sometimes there's testers out there that are calling to ask questions and make sure landlords are being equal and fair in their treatment of renting to new renters. But if somebody calls and says, "Do you accept Section 8?" Yes, all of our properties accept Section 8. That doesn't mean that they would necessarily qualify, 'cause typically a housing voucher comes with a set amount of rent, and so again, you would go back then to your income criteria. And interesting thing with the housing vouchers or third-party subsidies is when you're calculating the tenant's portion of rent, you need to include that as income. So, you wanna know specifically what your jurisdiction allows regarding that.
So if an owner is ever unsure whether a denial is defensible, what would you recommend, or what does Landmark do in that case?
Document, document, document. So everything's documented, every conversation, email, text, everything. Every denial should be traced back to your written criteria. So consistency, have your criteria, it's there to protect you.
No gut feelings. We have to have it written down. So, building that solid process up front seems like it pays off in a big way, both in the quality of placement and, of course, legal protection.
Yeah, the two are definitely connected. Good screening protects you from both.
Well, thanks, Kim. Thanks for listening. I'm Haley.
And I'm Kim, and we'll see you next time.